Hey everyone, Mr. Terror here. I want to start by saying a huge thank you for stopping by. It's incredible to know that we have viewers from all corners of the globe, and I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Drop your answers in the comments below, along with any highlights from your day so far. I'll be hanging out in the comments section, reacting to your messages, so don't be shy. Make sure to watch until the end. I always save the best stories for last. If you're enjoying the content, I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means so much and helps this community grow. Now, without further delay, let's dive into today's story. When I met Lily, I thought she was the answer to everything I had been searching for. We met at a charity fundraiser, a small, intimate event where we both happened to be cornered by an overly talkative host. I was drawn to her instantly. She had this calm, elegant demeanor, like she belonged in another era. Her laughter was soft but genuine, and she seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, a rare trait in the social circles I usually found myself in. Over the next few weeks, we texted constantly. Lily wasn't like the other women I'd dated. She had a quiet confidence about her that was both intriguing and disarming. She never overshared, but what she did reveal was fascinating. Her love for old movies, her passion for cooking, and her work as a freelance food stylist. When she invited me over for dinner, I was thrilled. "I'd love to cook for you," she said, her voice warm over the phone. "It's kind of my thing." Her apartment was in an older part of town, nestled between two brick buildings with ivy crawling up their sides. It was charming, much like her. Inside, the place was spotless but lived in, with small personal touches, framed photos, stacks of well-loved cookbooks, and a soft, earthy scent that I couldn't quite place. The dining table was set beautifully, with candlelight casting a warm glow over the room. The meal was nothing short of perfection. A roast lamb that melted in my mouth, buttery mashed potatoes, and fresh, vibrant greens. But as I savored the food, I noticed something strange. Lily didn't eat. She sipped her wine, occasionally cutting into the food on her plate, but never bringing it to her mouth. I joked about her being one of those people who love cooking more than eating, but she just smiled. "I already ate earlier," she said, brushing it off. It felt odd, but I didn't push. The meal was delicious, and her company was captivating. After dinner, we moved to the couch, where we talked for hours. I was enamored, completely under her spell. Still, something gnawed at the back of my mind. It wasn't just the fact that she hadn't eaten, it was little things. How she deflected questions about her past, how she seemed to know so much about me without my having told her, and how her apartment, while cozy, felt almost staged. When it was time to leave, she walked me to the door, her smile soft and inviting. "I had a great time," she said, her hand lingering on mine. "Me too," I replied, though the unease in my chest was growing. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about the dinner. The taste of the food lingered on my tongue, but so did the image of Lily's untouched plate. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe she really had eaten earlier. Maybe she was self-conscious about eating in front of someone new. But then I remembered something odd from earlier in the evening. Her fridge. When I'd gotten up to grab some water, I'd opened it and something had struck me as off. The shelves were full, but the contents were strange. Dozens of containers, all meticulously labeled. No snacks, no drinks, no leftovers, just rows and rows of neatly packed, identical containers. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it, but now the memory unsettled me. Why did she need so much food if she didn't eat? And what was in all those containers? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing, something important, and I had no idea how far down that rabbit hole I was about to go. I couldn't get Lily out of my mind after that night. Not her, not her untouched plate, and certainly not the strange sight of her fridge. My fascination with her deepened, but so did my unease. We continued seeing each other, and each time we met, Lily dazzled me. Her charm, her grace, and her ability to light up a room made it easy to ignore the little oddities, but those oddities began piling up. She always insisted on cooking for me, even when I offered to take her out. The meals were exquisite, works of art on every plate, but the pattern never changed. Lily never ate. At first, I chalked it up to her quirks, but I started paying closer attention. One night, after yet another amazing dinner at her place, I casually brought it up. "You're the best cook I've ever met, Lily, but you never seem to enjoy your own creations. Why is that?" She smiled, her hands delicately wrapping around her wine glass. "I just love the process more than the product. Watching someone else enjoy it is enough for me." It was a good answer, but it felt rehearsed. My curiosity got the better of me. The next time I visited her apartment, I made an excuse to go into the kitchen while she was setting the table. I opened her fridge again. The containers were still there, neatly stacked and labeled with dates. This time I noticed something else. No fresh produce, no beverages, no condiments. Just the containers? I grabbed one. The label read 2/12, but it gave no clue as to its contents. I held it up to the light, but the opaque material revealed nothing. "What are you doing?" Lily's voice startled me. She was standing in the doorway, her eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. "Just curious," I stammered, setting the container back. Her expression softened, but only slightly. "There's nothing interesting in there," she said, stepping closer. "Just leftovers for some food photography projects I'm working on." Her explanation was plausible enough, but the tension in her voice was unmistakable. That night, as I sat at the table, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was hiding something, and when she excused herself to take a call, I saw my opportunity. I quietly slipped back into the kitchen and grabbed another container, this time opening it. Inside was meat. But it didn't look like any meat I'd ever seen. It was pale, with an unusual texture, almost gelatinous. The smell was faint but strange, like something metallic mixed with earth. My stomach churned as I quickly sealed the container and put it back. I barely had time to return to my seat before Lily came back into the room, her expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" she asked, her eyes flicking to the kitchen for a split second. "Yeah, fine," I said, forcing a smile, but it wasn't fine. Later that night, when I got home, I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind. What kind of meat was that? Why did she have so much of it? And why the secrecy? I decided to do some digging. I started small, Googling her name, trying to find anything unusual about her, but her online presence was sparse, limited to a few professional profiles and social media accounts with minimal activity. Then I searched for news articles, narrowing my focus to her neighborhood. That's when I found something. A few months ago, there had been a string of disappearances in the area. 3 people had gone missing, all of them last seen near the same few blocks. One of the articles mentioned that the police had no suspects, but were investigating possible connections between the victims. All of them had been young, single, and new to the area. Like me. My heart raced as I scrolled through the article, the pieces starting to come together in my mind. Was Lily connected to this? Could she be involved? I didn't want to believe it, but the coincidences were piling up, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew about her. Who was Lily, really? And what was she hiding in her fridge? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the container, its strange contents, and Lily's sharp gaze. My mind spiraled into dark places, trying to piece together the fragments of what I had seen and what I suspected. The next morning I decided I needed answers, but I couldn't confront Lily directly, not yet. Instead, I started asking subtle questions during our next few conversations, testing the waters to see if she'd let anything slip. "Have you always lived in the city?" I asked casually one evening as we walked through a nearby park. "No, I moved here about a year ago," she replied, her voice light but distant. "Why here?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Fresh start, new opportunities. It was a vague answer, and it only made me more suspicious. That week, I did something I'd never done before. I followed her. It wasn't hard. Lily had a routine. She worked as a freelance food stylist, which meant her schedule was flexible, but she always seemed to visit the same places: a local market, a boutique butcher, and a small independent grocer tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The butcher shop caught my attention. It wasn't the kind of place you'd stumble upon unless you knew it was there. The sign above the door was faded, and the windows were so grimy you couldn't see inside. I waited across the street, pretending to check my phone, as Lily emerged from the shop carrying a plain brown bag. I couldn't see what was inside, but I made a mental note to come back later and check it out. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of something big, something terrifying. I decided to take my investigation a step further. The next day, while Lily was out, I returned to her apartment building. She had given me a spare key a few weeks ago, trusting me enough to let myself in if I arrived early. My stomach churned as I stood outside her door, the key in my hand. I told myself I was doing this to protect myself, to figure out the truth, but deep down, I knew I was crossing a line. I slipped inside, the familiar scent of her apartment washing over me. Everything was neat and orderly, just as it always was. I headed straight for the kitchen. The fridge stood there, humming softly as if mocking me. I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. The containers were still there, lined up like soldiers. This time, I grabbed 3. I opened the first one and my stomach turned. More meat, similar to what I'd seen before. But this time, I noticed something chilling: fragments of bone. The second container held the same meat, but it looked fresher, redder. The third container was different. It was filled with small round objects that looked like marbles, except they weren't marbles. They were too organic, too real. My hands trembled as I set the containers back and closed the fridge. "What are you doing?" Her voice froze me in place. I turned slowly to see Lily standing in the doorway, her eyes dark and unreadable. I was just looking for a drink," I stammered, my mind racing for an excuse. Her gaze bore into me, and for a moment I thought she was going to explode. But then she smiled. That same practiced smile I'd seen 100 times before. "There's water in the cabinet above the sink," she said, her tone cool and measured. I nodded and quickly grabbed a glass, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. As I filled it, I could feel her eyes on me, watching my every move. When I left her apartment that night, I knew one thing for sure. Lily was hiding something dark. But I didn't know how deep it went. Yet, after that night, I knew I couldn't let things continue the way they were. Something was deeply wrong with Lily, and the answers were hiding in plain sight, inside that fridge. I didn't know how far I was willing to go, but I had to know the truth. The next few days I played it cool, acting as if nothing had changed. Lily seemed unbothered, though there were moments when I caught her looking at me with a sharpness that made my skin crawl. I decided I needed reinforcements. My friend Mark had always been a skeptic, but he had a good head on his shoulders. I told him about the strange containers in Lily's fridge, leaving out the more disturbing details. "Dude, this sounds like some Silence of the Lambs type of thing," he said, half joking. "I'm not kidding, Mark. I don't know what's in those containers, but it's not normal. I need someone to back me up." After some convincing, he agreed to help. We planned to confront Lily the next evening, figuring she'd be less likely to lie with someone else in the room. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the containers, the bones, and the strange marble-like objects. What were they? And why did Lily keep so much of them? When the time came, Mark and I arrived at her apartment together. I'd told Lily we'd stop by for dinner, and she seemed oddly enthusiastic about it, even offering to cook. As we entered, the smell of something roasting filled the air. It was rich and savory, almost too good to be true. "I'm making my specialty," Lily said, her smile warm but her eyes distant. Mark shot me a look, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. What's in the food? Dinner was tense. Lily kept the conversation light, asking Mark about his work and hobbies, but her gaze occasionally flicked to me, as if she knew I was hiding something. When the meal was over, she excused herself to grab dessert from the kitchen. That was our moment. "Now," I whispered to Mark. We slipped into the kitchen and went straight to the fridge. "Holy," Mark whispered, staring at the containers. I opened one and showed him the contents. His face went pale. "This is messed up," he muttered. "What is this?" Before I could answer, the light suddenly went out, plunging the apartment into darkness. "Lily?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response. Mark pulled out his phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the fridge and its unsettling contents. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice urgent. But as we turned to leave, Lily was standing in the doorway, a knife in her hand. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice calm but cold. "Lily, you wanted to know the truth, didn't you?" she interrupted, stepping closer. "You couldn't just let things be." Mark held up his hands. "Look, we don't want any trouble. We'll just leave, okay?" She shook her head, her grip on the knife tightening. "You think you know me? You don't know anything." And then she started to laugh, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed in the small space. "Do you want to know what's in those containers? Fine, I'll tell you." Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as she explained. Lily had grown up in an isolated, abusive household. Her father was a hunter, and her mother had a fascination with taxidermy. Together, they taught her that life was expendable, that survival meant making use of everything and everyone. When she moved to the city, she carried those lessons with her. She started working as a food stylist, a career that allowed her to experiment with presentation and concealment. But it wasn't enough. She needed something more. "Those containers," she said, her eyes gleaming, "they're trophies. Pieces of people who thought they could take advantage of me, who thought they were better than me. They're my reminders that I'm in control now." I felt my stomach turn as her words sank in. "You're insane," Mark whispered. Lily tilted her head, her smile widening. "Maybe, but you're the ones who broke into my space. You're the ones who couldn't mind your own business." She lunged, and Mark reacted quickly, grabbing a nearby pan and deflecting her strike. I grabbed a container from the fridge and threw it at her, the lid popping off and its contents spilling onto the floor. The sight of it, the flesh, the bones, distracted her long enough for Mark to disarm her. We ran out of the apartment, calling the police as soon as we were safe. When they arrived, Lily was calm, almost serene, as they led her away in handcuffs. She didn't resist, didn't protest. As they searched her apartment, the truth became clear. The containers weren't just trophies. They were evidence of something much darker, something I still can't fully comprehend. To this day, I can't open a fridge without thinking about Lily and the secret she kept inside hers. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really knew her at all. It started out like any other day. I'd just gotten out of a long, exhausting relationship and figured I'd give online dating a try, just to get back out there, have some fun, and maybe meet someone new. I'm not one for big social scenes, so dating apps seemed like a decent enough way to meet people. But honestly, I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a few awkward conversations, some strange encounters, but nothing too crazy. It was late when I swiped right on his profile. His name was Lucas, tall, handsome, with piercing green eyes. His bio was simple: looking for someone who likes adventure. Nothing extraordinary, nothing too complicated. I figured, why not? So I swiped. Instantly we matched. I wasn't used to that kind of speed, Usually I'd send a few messages, wait for some back and forth, but no. Lucas seemed eager, almost too eager. His first message came in just seconds. "Hey, I'm glad we matched. You like hiking, right? I've got a great spot I'd love to show you." I was a little taken aback by the immediate familiarity of it. I mean, sure, I'd mentioned in my profile that I loved hiking, but who just assumes you're free and willing to go on a hike with someone you barely know? Still, I found myself intrigued. Maybe he was just excited. Maybe he wasn't like the usual guys on dating apps. So I replied, "That sounds nice, but a little spontaneous, don't you think?" His response was quick. "Spontaneity makes things more exciting. Let's make it happen." We kept chatting for a while. I won't lie, he had a way with words. By the end of our conversation, we had made plans to meet up that weekend. He seemed perfect. Fun, outgoing, charming. The red flags I'd usually be on the lookout for were nowhere to be seen. The next day I logged into Bumble to see if there were any other matches, but when I opened the app, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. Lucas was there too. I hadn't matched with him on Bumble. I knew I hadn't, but there he was, his profile staring back at me, exactly the same as it had been on Tinder. Same pictures, same bio, same message. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone had cloned his profile, or maybe it was a weird glitch. I shrugged it off and went about my day, but it didn't stop there. The next day Lucas messaged me again. On another app I didn't even remember signing up for, Hinge. The message was the same. "Spontaneity makes things more exciting. Let's make it happen." It was getting weird now. I hadn't downloaded Hinge in months, and yet here was his profile. Again, exactly the same. How was this happening? How was he showing up on all these platforms? I checked my phone's settings. No suspicious apps, nothing strange, just the usual dating apps I was using, and yet, somehow, Lucas was everywhere. The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. I brushed it off. Maybe it was a coincidence, a glitch. Maybe I was just overthinking things. That night, I received another message, not from an app this time, but from my email. I opened it, already feeling a sense of dread creeping over me. The subject line was simple: "Looking forward to our hike tomorrow." I read the message, my stomach sinking. "I know you're nervous, but I promise it'll be fun. Just trust me. I'll pick you up at 10 a.m. It was signed, Lucas. I had never given him my email address. I hadn't shared any personal information beyond my profile on the dating apps. How did he know my email? My heart was pounding in my chest as I quickly checked my inbox. There was nothing else. No suspicious activity, no strange emails except for that one. I spent the rest of the night feeling uneasy, my thoughts racing. The next day I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I checked the dating apps again. There he was, still popping up everywhere. His presence was suffocating, like he was following me through every platform. Around 9:30 a.m., my phone buzzed again. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Don't be late, I'll be waiting for you." It was him. There was no doubt about it. Lucas. But how was he getting my information? How was he following me through every app, every platform, even ones I hadn't used in years? I stood up from my bed and walked over to the window. The street outside was quiet, peaceful. But now, the sound of cars passing by only made me feel more paranoid. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that maybe I was overreacting, that it was just some strange coincidence. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I knew that meeting Lucas, this charming stranger from the apps, wasn't going to be the harmless adventure I thought it was. As the time ticked closer to 10 a.m., I felt my anxiety building. I didn't want to meet him, not anymore. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I was in danger. Before I could make any decisions, I got another message. It was from him. "Don't worry, I'm already here." I glanced nervously at the clock. The message had come through at 9:58 a.m. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I scanned the street outside my window, looking for any sign of him. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood by the parked car across the street, looking directly at my window. It wasn't just anyone. It was him. His green eyes locked onto mine from across the street, and just before he smiled, I felt my stomach drop. He'd been watching me long before this. He had been watching me from the very beginning. I stood frozen by the window, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no mistaking it. Lucas was out there, standing across the street, just staring up at my apartment. His smile was unsettling. It wasn't the confident, charming smile he'd shown in his profile pictures. No, this was something different. It was wide, too wide, almost as if it didn't quite belong to the person I had been talking to. I quickly pulled away from the window, my breath shallow, and stumbled back into the kitchen. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had he found me? How had he known exactly where I lived? I felt a sudden wave of nausea. I grabbed my phone and opened every app where I'd seen him, Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, but he wasn't there. The apps had gone silent, like they were mocking me. There were no new notifications, no messages from him. It was as if he'd vanished, except for that one moment when he had locked eyes with me. I tried calling a friend. I needed someone to talk to, someone who would reassure me that this was all a coincidence, a misunderstanding. But my phone went straight to voicemail. I tried texting, but there was no reply. Something wasn't right. Lucas wasn't just a guy from the apps anymore. He was something far more persistent, someone who knew more about me than I was comfortable with. I checked the front door, locked it, and then moved to the back window, looking out into the alley behind my apartment. There was no sign of him back there. No sign of any car either. I grabbed my bag, my heart still hammering in my chest, and rushed toward the door. I wasn't going to wait for him to come to me. I couldn't. I needed to get out of there, to feel safe. My mind was a jumbled mess of thoughts, but the one thing that stood out clearly was that I couldn't face him. Not yet. I took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and stepped out into the hallway. My pulse quickened as I moved toward the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence of the building. I felt like I was being followed, even though no one was behind me. The paranoia was starting to set in. I reached the ground floor and hurried out the front door, scanning the street as I did. He wasn't there. No green eyes, no piercing stare from across the road. For a second, I felt a sense of relief, but it was short-lived. I pulled out my phone again, checking the map. I needed to get out, but I also needed answers. Maybe it was time to do some digging into Lucas. I opened up a search engine and typed in his name. At first, there was nothing. Just a few generic social media profiles, no real details. But then I clicked on one link, and something froze in my blood. A news article popped up from a local news station. The headline read, "Missing person alert, Lucas Walker, 29, last seen 1 week ago." I stared at the screen for a long time. My breath caught in my throat. This couldn't be right. It had to be some sort of mistake. But the photo attached to the article was unmistakable. It was the same Lucas, the one I had been chatting with. I skimmed the article, heart racing faster as I read about the man who had disappeared a week ago. Authorities had issued a missing person alert, but there had been no sign of him. They suspected foul play, but there were no leads. His family, his friends, no one had heard from him since he'd gone missing. Then something else caught my eye. It was a comment from a user below the article, posted just hours ago. "I saw him. He was on Tinder last night. I don't know how, but he's alive. And he's been talking to other people." I stared at the comment for a long time, the words sinking in. I wasn't the only one. Other people had been in contact with him. This wasn't a coincidence. But how? How was he alive? How was he using dating apps, sending messages to people? when he was supposed to be missing. Before I could process this, my phone buzzed in my hand. A new message. It was from Lucas. "I'm waiting for you. Don't make me come up there." My blood turned to ice. How did he know where I was? How was he tracking me? I looked around the street, paranoid now, certain he was nearby, watching me. Every car that passed, every pedestrian who walked by, were they in on it? Were they working with him? I couldn't stay on the street. I couldn't be out in the open anymore. I had to find somewhere safe. I ducked into a nearby coffee shop, trying to act casual, though my mind was racing. I sat down in the back corner, my eyes darting between the door and my phone. I opened the dating apps again, looking for any trace of him. And there it was. His profile had appeared again, this time on an app I'd never even heard of. It was called XOXO. He was everywhere, constantly appearing on new platforms. It was like he had access to my life in ways that didn't make sense, like he was always one step ahead. I couldn't trust my own devices anymore. I couldn't trust anything. I glanced up, feeling a chill run down my spine. The coffee shop was quiet, the soft hum of the espresso machine the only sound. But I noticed something, or rather, someone. A man was sitting near the door, his back turned toward me. He was staring at his phone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I squinted, recognizing the shape of his jawline. His posture, even his hands as he typed. It was Lucas. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck as I stared at the man sitting near the door. His fingers tapped steadily on his phone, oblivious to me, or so I thought. I felt paralyzed, unsure of what to do. My heart was pounding, thumping in my chest so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I tried to act normal, though every instinct in me screamed to run. My mind raced. Did he see me? Was he waiting for me to make a move? I glanced at the door, wondering if I could slip out unnoticed, but then something caught my eye. His screen. I could barely make out what he was typing, but I could see the unmistakable blue outline of a message. "I'm watching you." I couldn't breathe. I had to be imagining it. There was no way this was happening. I couldn't let it continue. I couldn't let him control me, not like this, but what choice did I have? I was trapped. He knew where I was. I was sure of it now. The man sitting just a few feet away wasn't just a random stranger. He was Lucas. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I sat there, frozen, waiting for him to make the next move. Was this part of his game, to torment me until I had nowhere left to turn? I glanced around the coffee shop. There were a few other patrons, but they were engrossed in their laptops or scrolling through their phones, blissfully unaware of the nightmare unfolding around them. I felt like a character in a bad movie, trapped in the tension-filled scene where the stalker is about to make their move. Except this wasn't a movie. This was real. I tried to steady my breath and typed a message to my best friend, hoping to find some comfort. "Something's wrong. I think I'm being watched. Please call me back." I hit send and waited, watching the man at the door as if I was in some twisted standoff. My fingers hovered over my phone, waiting for a reply, but there was nothing. No sound, no vibration. It was as if the world had gone silent around me. Suddenly, the man at the door shifted in his seat. He stood up slowly, with deliberate slowness, and casually made his way to the counter. The whole time, his eyes never left me. I could feel his gaze like an invisible weight pressing down on me. I couldn't take it anymore. Without thinking, I shoved my phone in my pocket, stood up, and bolted toward the exit. My feet felt heavy, like I was moving through water, but I didn't care. I needed to get out. I needed to escape. As I pushed open the door, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I whirled around, heart skipping a beat, only to find a barista standing there, holding out my coffee. "Excuse me, ma'am, you forgot your drink," she said with a kind smile. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "Thank you," I muttered, taking the coffee from her hands, but I didn't stop to talk. I didn't even look back as I walked out of the shop. I was almost out of the parking lot when I saw him again, standing near a car just a few yards away, looking directly at me. His eyes were piercing, that same unsettling grin playing on his lips. Lucas. I thought I was going to be sick. How was he always there? How had he known to follow me? I fumbled for my keys, my hands trembling as I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut, my heart in my throat. I had to get away from him, but my mind was clouded with panic. I started the car and pulled out of the lot without a second thought, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't escaping. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him again, his figure standing at the entrance of the coffee shop, watching me drive away. It didn't make sense. Why was he doing this? As I sped down the road, I pulled out my phone once more. Maybe I could find something, anything, that could give me answers. I opened the search engine and typed his name again, trying to dig deeper into the mystery. This time I found something. Another article. It was from a year ago, about an incident I hadn't heard of. It was about Lucas Walker's past, his history of stalking, harassment, and the numerous women he had been involved with. He wasn't just a random guy who had found me on a dating app. He had done this before. He had followed women, tracked their movements, and had even gone so far as to change his identity, pretending to be someone else to avoid suspicion. But what truly terrified me was one line in the article. Lucas Walker was last seen at a mental health facility 2 years ago after being involved in an alleged stalking incident. Authorities were unable to determine whether he had been released voluntarily or through other means. He wasn't just a guy from the apps, he was someone with a history, someone who had been given a second chance, and I was his next target. Suddenly my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Lucas. "You can't run from me. Your name. I'll always find you. We're meant to be together." I felt the world tilt beneath me. My heart stopped. I was no longer in control. The message was clear. This was no longer just a game. It was something far more terrifying. I didn't know where to go, what to do, or who I could trust anymore. The worst part? I wasn't sure I could stop him. I wasn't safe anymore. That message, those words, echoed in my mind as I drove, barely aware of where I was going. The world around me felt like it was closing in, each turn of the wheel leading me deeper into uncertainty. The thought that Lucas had been tracking me all along made my skin crawl. I was no longer just a victim of chance. I had been chosen, and he had made it his mission to make me his. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "I see you." I slammed on the brakes. My heart stopped as my surroundings seemed a blur, becoming a whirl of motion as my mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. I looked up, my eyes scanning the area around me. My headlights illuminated a lone figure standing on the sidewalk just ahead. It was Lucas. I had to act. Panic surged through me, but I didn't freeze this time. My brain, despite the haze of fear, seemed to snap back to reality. I wasn't going to let him control me. Not anymore. I slammed the car into reverse, heart hammering in my chest, praying I wouldn't hit anything as I backed away. But before I could make any more distance, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, followed by a strange jolt. The car stuttered to a halt. I looked down to see the phone in my hand vibrating wildly, the screen flashing in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't know it then, but Lucas wasn't just physically near me. Somehow his presence had reached far beyond just his body. He had infiltrated my life in ways I couldn't comprehend, and his influence over me had grown insidious. My phone was a tool in his hands. He knew everything, my every move, every app I used, and every device I had. The sound of a door creaking open snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned, expecting to see him standing at my window, but instead I saw something far worse. A figure, a woman, was standing in front of my car. She was just like Lucas, but there was something different about her. Her eyes were cold, unblinking, and her face was blank. At first I thought she was another victim, someone else who had been manipulated by him, but then I recognized her. It was me. The realization hit me like a freight train. The woman in front of me wasn't just a random stranger, she was me. Not a reflection, but someone who had my exact features. Same clothes, same hair, same everything. I could feel my hands trembling as I reached for the door handle, but I couldn't open it. The woman stepped closer, her eyes locking onto mine. She spoke, softly, eerily calm. "You're not going anywhere." I screamed, slamming my foot down on the gas pedal, but the car didn't move. The woman, me, reached for my phone, and the screen went black. Suddenly, the world around me changed. I was no longer in the car. I was back in my apartment, sitting in front of my computer, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. It felt like I was in some kind of dream. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but nothing changed. I tried to stand up, but my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen. I looked at the computer screen. Every dating app I had ever used was open, with messages from Lucas filling every single one. Every match, every message, every single application. He had been here all along, watching me, controlling me, pulling the strings. But the worst part? The part that made my stomach churn and my pulse quicken in a terrifying mix of horror and disbelief? The profiles I had seen on all those apps weren't just his. They were mine. Every time I thought I was matching with him, I was matching with myself. I had unknowingly been drawn into his web, only to realize I had been his creation all along. It was as though every move I made was part of a twisted experiment he had been running for who knows how long. There was no escape. I was him. I had become part of his sick, twisted obsession, a loop that would never end. Just then, the door to my apartment opened and Lucas stepped inside. His smile was wide, satisfied. "You didn't think it was just the apps, did you?" he said softly, as though speaking to a child who had just learned a hard truth. "I created you," he whispered. "I was never the one you needed to escape from. It was always yourself." And then, before I could react, everything went dark. I met him through a friend. That's usually how these things go, right? We had mutual acquaintances, and when she introduced us, I was instantly intrigued. He had this kind of charm, the quiet confidence that made people gravitate toward him. His name was Adam. He was the kind of guy who made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he spoke to you. We decided to meet for dinner at a small, intimate restaurant that had just the right mix of ambiance. Dim lights, soft music in the background, and the smell of freshly baked bread lingering in the air. We had talked on the phone a few times before the date, but I was still nervous. It was one of those first date jitters, even though I was trying not to let it show. Adam was polite, funny, and well-spoken. We laughed about the usual first date stuff, awkward moments, bad dates, and some lighter topics. But soon, the conversation drifted into more personal territory. We shared our goals, our dreams, even some embarrassing childhood stories. It felt easy, like we had known each other for years, which only made me feel more comfortable. The food came out, and we ate, continued talking, and the evening seemed to unfold just like it should, perfectly. His smile was reassuring, and I found myself genuinely enjoying his company. By the time we were finishing our dessert, I thought, this could be something, maybe he's the one. That's when things started to feel off. It happened when I excused myself to go to the bathroom. It was a small, unassuming space tucked away behind a velvet curtain. I walked back toward the table, feeling relaxed, when I glanced over and saw Adam looking down at his phone. No big deal. He had probably just checked his messages. But then, I froze. From across the room, I saw his thumb swipe across the screen, and his eyes flicked up to meet mine. I smiled, expecting him to put his phone down and continue the conversation. Instead, he sent a quick glance at the screen, then back at me. Weird, I thought, but I brushed it off. When I returned to the table, I noticed something odd. Adam was no longer looking directly at me as we resumed talking. Instead, his eyes kept darting down to his phone screen, then up at me. He wasn't quite engaging with the conversation in the same way anymore, almost as if his mind was somewhere else. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's checking his work emails, I thought, but the more I observed, the stranger it felt. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I received the first text. It was from him. "You look beautiful tonight." I blinked, my stomach dropping. He was sitting across from me, not more than 5 feet away, but here he was texting me. How did he even... I looked up to find his gaze still fixed on his phone, but he didn't seem to be watching me closely. His fingers were moving rapidly across the screen, sending message after message, but his attention was elsewhere. Confused, I decided to respond, just to see what he would do next. "Thanks, but you're sitting right across from me. Why are you texting me?" A few seconds passed, then my phone buzzed again. "I know, but I like how it feels when you're not looking at me." My breath caught in my throat. What did that even mean? I looked up from my phone, and now Adam was no longer looking at his screen. He was staring directly at me, his eyes dark, almost as if he were studying me. There was something in the way he looked at me, something unsettling, like he knew too much. Is this a joke? I thought. I had to remind myself it was still just a first date. Maybe he was just quirky, trying to be mysterious in some odd way, but my gut told me something wasn't quite right. I tried to push the thought away, continuing our conversation. I even laughed at something he said, but the words felt hollow in my mouth. There was a tension in the air now, something I couldn't shake. Every time I spoke, I felt his eyes on me, but not in a normal way, almost as if he were dissecting every word I said, analyzing me. And then the text came again. "I've been watching you the whole time. You haven't even noticed." My heart skipped a beat. I quickly glanced up from my phone, trying to mask my discomfort. Adam was still sitting there, smiling, but his eyes, they were cold, almost predatory. I scanned the room, trying to see what he was talking about. The restaurant was nearly empty, save for a few other diners across the room. There was no one staring at me, but the way Adam was looking at me, it felt like I was being watched by someone else, someone hidden. What do I do? I thought. I felt trapped. The date was supposed to be a fun experience, a simple dinner, but now it felt like something was lurking beneath the surface. I tried to keep my composure, but my hands began to tremble, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. Adam's next message made my stomach twist in knots. "You're not the only one who's been watching." Suddenly my phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message from Adam. It was a notification from a social media app. "New friend request." I opened the app, my fingers shaking, and there it was. A new request, from someone I didn't know. The profile picture was a blank black square. What the hell is going on? I thought. My mind raced, but before I could process it, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Adam. "You've been matched with me on every app." I didn't know what that meant yet, but deep down, I knew. Something was terribly wrong. I tried to focus on the new notification from the social media app, but it was hard to think clearly. Who would send me a friend request with a black square as a profile picture? I glanced up at Adam. He was still sitting there staring at me, but this time it wasn't a smile. It was more of a knowing smirk. His fingers weren't on his phone anymore, but his eyes were glued to mine, as if waiting for me to acknowledge what was happening. I felt a chill run down my spine. No one could know what I was thinking right now. Could they? I turned my attention back to the app, hoping it was just a weird glitch. Maybe it was a bot or a mistake, but the name on the request caught me off guard. Adam. I froze. The last thing I expected was to see his name attached to this unfamiliar account. What the hell? I clicked on the profile, and there was nothing but a few random posts, all with dark, cryptic captions. "Can you feel me?" was one of them. "We've always been here," was another. It didn't make sense. It felt like I was looking at something from a nightmare. I had to say something, so I cleared my throat and looked up at Adam. "Why did you send me that friend request?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though I could hear the tremble in my voice. "And who's the account really for?" His smile never wavered, but there was something unsettling about it now. "Don't worry about it. It's just part of how we're connected." I stared at him, waiting for some explanation, but he didn't offer one. "Connected how?" I asked, feeling my stomach twist with dread. "What do you mean? This isn't funny anymore." He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on me, his voice low and calm. "You've been matched with me on every app. I've seen you everywhere. I've been waiting for this." I didn't know what to say. I felt as though the room was closing in on me, the walls pressing down on my shoulders. My pulse quickened as a knot formed in my stomach. "Wait, what do you mean waiting?" I managed to ask, my voice shaky. "How could you know that?" Adam didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow sip of his drink, eyes never leaving mine. I glanced down at my phone again, hoping to make sense of what was happening, but the screen remained blank. "I'm going to go to the restroom," I said quickly, standing up from the table. I needed to get away. I needed some space to think, to breathe. Adam didn't stop me, but as I turned to walk toward the bathroom, I caught one last glimpse of him. His expression was different now. Not friendly, not even smug. It was as if he was waiting for something, waiting for me to figure it out. As I walked down the hallway to the bathroom, I felt my phone buzz again. I didn't look at it immediately. My mind was racing. What the hell is going on? When I reached the bathroom, I locked the door behind me and took a deep breath. Okay, I'm overreacting. This is just a coincidence. Maybe he's just a weird guy, and I need to just leave. But even as I told myself this, a creeping sense of fear tightened in my chest. I pulled out my phone and checked the new message. "You're thinking of leaving. I can't let that happen." My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. The only thing I could think was to get out of there. Fast. I ran my hand through my hair, panicking. There was no way this could be real. I opened the app again, looking for some kind of confirmation that it was all just a mistake, that maybe it was a bug, or that he had some weird way of hacking into my phone. But as soon as I opened the app, the messages started flooding in. "Don't go. We're meant to be together. I've been following you for a long time, watching you. We've always been connected. You just don't know it yet." I felt my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. This couldn't be happening. There was no way this could be real. I grabbed my purse and rushed out of the bathroom, my footsteps echoing through the hallway. My mind was racing as I tried to piece everything together. How could this be happening? Who is this guy? As I stepped back into the dining area, I was already planning my exit. I was going to leave. I was going to get out of there, but when I looked toward the table, Adam wasn't sitting there anymore. I scanned the room, but I couldn't find him. I felt a jolt of panic. Where did he go? I turned quickly to the restaurant's exit, but before I could move toward the door, my phone buzzed again. "You can't leave yet. You're not ready." I froze. The words seemed to sink deep into my bones. I couldn't breathe. I looked down at my phone screen again, but this time I saw something even worse than the text. It was a new notification. A video. I didn't want to open it, but my fingers betrayed me. I tapped on it and the video loaded. It was from my own camera. It was a video of me sitting at the table out eating dinner. Just moments ago. The camera angle was perfect, exactly how I had been sitting across from Adam. I felt bile rise in my throat. How could he have? My thoughts stopped dead. The realization hit me with a sharp, cold clarity. The video wasn't from my phone, it was from his, and I had no idea how deep this was going to go. I stood frozen, my hand still clutching my phone, unable to tear my eyes away from the video. I watched myself, a version of myself I didn't recognize, sitting alone, laughing softly at a joke I didn't remember telling, enjoying the moment like everything was normal, but I wasn't alone. Adam was in the background, just out of focus enough for me not to see him, but I could tell he was there, watching, waiting. The camera was angled from above, perfectly positioned as if someone had been hovering over my shoulder the whole time. My breath caught in my throat. This isn't real. I shook my head, forcing myself to calm down. It can't be. This is just some sick prank. Some really twisted prank. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a prank. I had to get out of there. I turned on my heels and made my way toward the exit, desperate to leave this nightmare behind. The exit was only a few feet away, but the closer I got to the door, the heavier my legs felt, as if the air itself had become thick, suffocating. Before I could reach the door, my phone buzzed again. "Don't go. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." I stopped. My heart dropped into my stomach, my fingers trembling. I stared at the screen for a moment, too terrified to move, before my eyes darted around the restaurant. Was he watching me now? Was he in here, right now, hidden in plain sight? I couldn't tell. I forced myself to turn and walk toward the front counter instead, my mind racing. There was no way this was a coincidence anymore. He was here, somewhere in the restaurant, maybe even closer than I realized. What the hell does he want from me? I reached the counter, trying to keep my composure. I needed help. The host was busy chatting with another guest, but I didn't care. I tapped the counter, forcing myself to speak. "Can I please speak to the manager?" The host glanced up at me, looking slightly surprised, but nodded and called someone over. As I waited, I glanced down at my phone once more. Another message. "You can't trust anyone here. They're all in on it. It's only you and me." My stomach twisted. What the hell does that mean? Before I could process the message fully, a woman in a dark suit approached. She looked professional, calm, but there was something off about her. Her eyes flicked to my phone, and I saw a faint flicker of recognition cross her face before she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "How can I help you?" she asked politely. I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. Something about her demeanor felt too rehearsed, too practiced. "I need help," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm being harassed. I'm being stalked by someone. I think he's in here. Before I could finish, she cut me off. "Don't worry, dear. We've been expecting you." Her voice was too calm, almost too soothing. It sent a ripple of panic through me. I didn't have time to question her words. My mind was already racing, already calculating the best way to get out of the restaurant. "I don't know who you think you're dealing with," I said, my voice rising, but the woman smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, too calculated. "You're not ready to leave yet," she said softly. In an instant, my mind flashed back to the messages I had received from Adam. "Don't leave. You're not ready." I tried to make sense of what was happening, but the panic was overwhelming. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think clearly. Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. "It's over. You belong to me now." That was it. The last straw. I bolted for the door. But before I could reach it, something caught my eye. Adam was standing at the entrance, blocking my way. My heart nearly stopped. He had that same smirk on his face, that same knowing look. He didn't move, but his eyes locked onto mine, and I knew, in that moment, that he had been watching me the entire time. "Don't leave," he said, his voice smooth, almost like a song. "It's time to join me." I was shaking now, every instinct telling me to run, but my legs felt like lead. I tried to look around, but the rest of the restaurant had gone eerily silent. Every person in the place, every waiter, every other diner was watching me. There were no conversations, no sounds of clinking glasses, just silence and the feeling that I was being watched by everyone in the room. They weren't just watching me, they were waiting. The woman in the suit stepped closer to Adam, her smile never fading. It's time. I didn't know what they were going to do, but I knew that whatever it was, I wasn't ready for it. Panic surged through me. I had to leave. I turned on my heel and ran toward the side exit, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The door was almost within reach, but my phone buzzed again, louder now, more insistent. Don't even think about running. It was like he was inside my head, controlling my every move. My fingers fumbled for the handle, and just as I was about to open it, a hand gripped my wrist. I whipped around to face Adam, who was standing behind me. There was no emotion on his face now, just a cold, blank stare. "You can't run," he said softly, almost lovingly. "You're mine now." I couldn't escape. He was too close, too strong, and the terror was suffocating. But before I could react, the woman spoke again. "Take her to the back," she said, her tone like she was giving an order. And just like that, 2 of the staff members appeared beside me, each grabbing an arm. They pulled me away, my feet stumbling as I tried to break free, but it was no use. I was trapped. I didn't know how long they dragged me through the restaurant's labyrinth of back hallways. My feet barely touched the ground, the terror overwhelming me to the point where I was almost numb to the motions of their hands gripping my arms. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow on the dull peeling walls. The further we went, the more I felt the walls closing in. The hum of the lights grew louder, almost deafening, until it became the only sound I could hear, drowning out all reason, drowning out my thoughts. They finally stopped in front of an unmarked door. It was a steel door, cold and imposing, with no windows, no signs. The woman in the dark suit stepped forward and turned the handle without a word. The door creaked open, and the dim glow from the hallway spilled into the room, revealing a sterile, empty space. Inside, there was only a single chair in the middle of the room, and the walls were lined with monitors. I could see the glow from the screens reflected in their eyes, their faces illuminated in an unnatural way. Adam stood in the corner, watching, silent, like he knew this was only the beginning. "Sit down," the woman commanded, her voice colder now, no longer pretending to be friendly. Her gaze flicked to the chair, then back to me. "You're going to understand soon enough." I had no choice. Every part of my body screamed to run, to escape, but they were too strong, too quick. The 2 staff members shoved me into the chair, and I found myself sitting there, unable to move. My mind was racing, but every attempt to process what was happening was interrupted by the overwhelming sense of dread. I had no idea what they wanted with me, but it was clear now that this was more than some twisted dinner date. The woman walked to one of the monitors and typed something into the keyboard. The screens flickered for a moment before showing a grainy image. My face, frozen in time. It was from the date. My eyes, my smile, everything was there. Everything was captured. "Do you like your little game?" she asked, turning to face me. Her lips curled into a cruel smile. "We've been watching you for a while now. We knew you'd be perfect for this." I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, tight. What is this?" Adam finally spoke, his voice low and menacing. "You think this is about you? About me? No. This is about control. This is about being in the right place at the right time. I chose you because you were vulnerable. You're the perfect candidate." The pieces started to click together in my mind, but I still couldn't fully understand. Why me? What did they want? Who are you people? My voice cracked. The woman's smile only deepened as she glanced over at Adam. "We are a network, a secret organization, one that controls the flow of information, controls the people. You're not just a random target, you were selected. Selected? What for? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pressed a button and the room went dark for a moment. Then the monitors flickered again, this time showing an entire set of images. Footage of me, from different angles, from different places, some from my apartment, some from the park, others from my workplace. And it clicked. They had been watching me all along. They had followed me, tracked me, studying me. This wasn't just some sick game. This was surveillance. This was control. You were chosen because we knew you wouldn't resist. You were vulnerable, lonely, and naive enough to think that the apps, the matches, the dates were just random coincidences. The woman stepped closer, her voice taking on a sinister edge. You were just a pawn in our game, a test subject for our system. Adam's smirk only grew as he watched me process the horror of it all. This isn't just about dating, it's about infiltration. We use the apps, the technology, to manipulate and control. You weren't the first, and you won't be the last. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, my thoughts scrambling to make sense of what was happening. My hands clenched the arms of the chair, trying to hold on to something, anything. You knew, I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. You knew I'd fall for it. You knew I'd trust you. Adam nodded slowly. Of course, it's the perfect plan. Build a relationship, make someone feel seen, wanted, and then take it all away, slowly, piece by piece. I couldn't breathe. My thoughts were spiraling out of control, and I could barely focus as I tried to piece together everything that had happened. The dinner, the texts, the messages I'd been played from the very start. I wasn't the victim here. I was the test. The woman stepped even closer, now inches from me. Now you understand. We have you, and you won't be going anywhere. We need you for the next phase, and there's no escaping it. My entire body went numb. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight. They had controlled everything, my date, my movements, everything. I was a pawn in their twisted game, and there was no way out. They had won. Welcome to the family, the woman said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. The screens flickered again, and I caught a glimpse of myself, sitting there in the chair, my face a reflection of the terror that was slowly suffocating me, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I'd never truly been in control. I was never meant to escape. Adam and the woman walked away, leaving me alone in the dark room, surrounded by the glowing monitors, each one tracking my every move. It was over, and I knew deep down that I'd never be free again. I'd been scrolling through my social media feed, mindlessly checking my messages when I saw it, a friend request from a name I didn't recognize. Normally I'd ignore it, but for some reason this time I didn't. The name was Sophie Ellis, and her profile picture was a blurry photo of a woman smiling in what looked like a park. Nothing unusual, but the more I stared at her picture, the more I felt like I had seen her before. I accepted the request. Within moments, a message popped up in my inbox. It was short, simple. Hi, I know this might sound strange, but I feel like we're connected somehow. I didn't reply immediately. My mind raced. How did she know me? Was this some kind of weird scam? Or maybe a mistaken identity? Either way, I wasn't going to entertain it too long. But then, a second message came in. You've been having vivid dreams, haven't you? Dreams that don't make sense, but you feel like there's something important in them. It's not just in your head, it's real. I froze. I hadn't told anyone about my dreams. How could she know that? Every night for the past few weeks I'd been dreaming about a woman, someone I couldn't quite place. In these dreams, I was always standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. The house was old, dark, and had an eerie, abandoned feel. Then there was a sound, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. I'd wake up every morning with my heart pounding, sweating, and feeling like I hadn't actually left the dream. And now, this woman, this Sophie Ellis, was telling me I wasn't imagining it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of how to respond. Was this some kind of prank? I decided to ask her a simple question, something to gauge how she knew all of this. How do you know about the dreams? The response came almost immediately. You're not alone. We've been looking for you. The house, the one in your dreams, it's real, and it's calling you. I can help you find it, but you have to trust me. I stared at the message. This wasn't normal. This wasn't some random stranger. This was something else entirely. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't open it right away. My mind was racing. Should I block her, ignore it, or should I go to this house she was talking about? I decided to reply. How do you know all of this? The message came back, but it was different this time. It wasn't a single message. It was a string of texts, all stacked on top of each other. Because I've been to the house. I've been inside. I know what you've seen, but it's not over. It's waiting for you. You're not the only one. There's someone else. Someone who's been following you. My heart skipped a beat. I had no idea what she meant by someone else, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Who was following me? Suddenly, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Maybe it was the way Sophie's messages sounded, so certain, so urgent, or maybe it was the unsettling realization that this wasn't a random encounter. This woman knew something, and somehow it felt like I had no choice but to keep talking to her. What do you mean by following me? I typed, my fingers shaking. There was a long pause. For a moment I thought she might not respond, but then my phone buzzed again. They're watching you right now. Don't go outside. I looked out the window, trying to push down the rising panic. There was nothing unusual out there. No one in sight. But her words gnawed at me. They're watching you. I quickly shut my phone, trying to convince myself this was all some sort of elaborate prank, but a cold chill spread over me, and my eyes kept darting toward the window. I didn't know what to believe anymore. This wasn't a game. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. And Sophie Ellis? I was starting to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake by accepting her friend request. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Sophie's messages kept echoing in my mind. They're watching you. I tried to go about my day, but I couldn't focus on anything. Work felt pointless, and I couldn't even sit still for a meal. The dread was palpable, creeping under my skin, making it hard to breathe. Every little noise felt amplified, every car passing by, every door closing in the building. My eyes darted toward the window constantly. I hadn't replied to Sophie's last message. I didn't know what to say, but deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. She was right about one thing. The house in my dreams was real. That night, I finally broke. The curiosity mixed with fear, and I opened up my phone again. Sophie had sent multiple messages in the hours I had been avoiding her. Are you ready? The house isn't just a place, it's a door, and you need to walk through it. I swallowed hard as my thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't want to respond, but something inside me pushed me to type. Where is it? She didn't hesitate. I've marked the location on your map. Trust me. I felt a shiver run through me as I opened the map. A location pinned in the middle of nowhere appeared. It was marked with an address I didn't recognize, and my stomach churned when I saw it. It was only about a 30-minute drive from where I lived. I wasn't sure if I was making the biggest mistake of my life, or if I was finally about to discover the truth. I had to go. But as I stood up to grab my coat, I stopped. Something in the back of my mind screamed at me to be careful. I looked out the window again, but it was dark. Too dark. I had never driven there before. The area felt unfamiliar. The thought of going there alone made me sick, but I knew I had to. By the time I got into my car, the fog had set in. The streets were eerily quiet, and I could barely see ahead. The headlights of my car barely cut through the thick mist as I drove through empty streets. The area Sophie had pointed to was tucked away between dense trees and rolling hills. It felt wrong, like I was being led into some hidden part of the world I was never meant to see. The map took me to the outskirts of a small, crumbling neighborhood. The houses here were old, some abandoned, some still inhabited, but all of them seemed to have a gloomy, forgotten air about them. I kept driving, my heart racing, trying to convince myself this was just a coincidence, just a strange turn of events. And then, there it was. At the end of the road stood a house that looked just like the one from my dreams. It wasn't as large as I had imagined, but it had the same decaying, eerie charm. It was a 2-story house with broken windows, overgrown weeds curling around the base, and a large rusted gate that seemed to almost reach for the sky. The door creaked as the wind blew, and there was a palpable stillness about it. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I could feel her presence, like she was there too, watching me from somewhere, waiting for me to take the next step. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I knew I had to go inside. I walked up to the gate, the gravel crunching under my boots as I approached. The house seemed to loom larger the closer I got, the fog thickening around it like a cloak. My mind raced with questions. Was Sophie already inside? Was this some kind of trap? But it wasn't just Sophie's message that kept me walking forward. It was the pull, the nagging feeling in my gut that I was supposed to be here. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard it, the creaking, a door opening, but it wasn't coming from inside the house, it was behind me. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing, just the empty, fog-covered street. I turned back to the house, my hand on the door. It was as if something was pushing me forward, telling me to just enter. I took a deep breath, twisted the knob, and walked inside. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, and an overwhelming sense of coldness hit me. The air felt damp, thick with a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. My heart pounded, each beat reverberating in my chest. The fog outside clung to the windows, filtering the little light that was left, casting the house in an eerie gray glow. I took a step inside, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. The silence was deafening, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. The faint smell of mildew and something else, something metallic, lingered in the air. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a place that had been abandoned for far too long. I hesitated at the threshold, unsure of what to do next. The door swung shut behind me with a soft thud, and the chill in the room seemed to grow more intense. My fingers trembled as I fumbled for my phone, half expecting to hear Sophie's voice again, to get some kind of reassurance, but there was nothing, not a single message. I turned the flashlight on, the beam slicing through the darkness. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the colors long faded, leaving behind an unsettling abstract pattern that seemed to swirl and change the longer I looked at it. My footsteps echoed as I moved deeper into the house, drawn forward by a force I couldn't explain. The first room I entered was a small, dimly lit living room, decorated with old furniture draped in dust-covered sheets. A cracked mirror hung above a fireplace, its surface warped and dirty, distorting whatever reflection it held. I scanned the room for any sign of life, but everything seemed still, frozen in time. I didn't know what I expected. I had hoped, perhaps, that Sophie would be waiting here, ready to explain everything, reassure me that this was all part of some elaborate game, but there was no sign of her, and the longer I stayed in the house, the more unsettled I became. I walked further into the hallway, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I passed by closed doors. The house felt claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in around me, suffocating me. I could hear my own breath, quick and shallow, and my mind kept racing, trying to make sense of it all. Then a soft creak broke the silence, a noise from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat and I froze, listening intently. It was a slow, deliberate sound, as though someone or something was moving up there. I called out, my voice sounding foreign and strained in the quiet of the house. "Hello?" No answer. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave before I found something I wasn't supposed to see, but something kept pulling me forward. I couldn't explain it. My feet were moving before my mind could catch up. The stairs groaned as I ascended, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the top, I found myself facing a narrow hallway with several doors. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of rot and decay. The house seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a presence I couldn't shake. The first door on the right was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the hinges screeching in protest. The room was dark, the only light coming from the hallway behind me, but as I stepped in, my flashlight landed on something that made my blood run cold. There, in the center of the room, was a chair. A single chair, but it was far from ordinary. Strapped to it was a figure, its body contorted unnaturally, bound tightly with rope. It was covered in what looked like fresh bruises, and its face was obscured by a mask, but I could tell it was still alive. My stomach churned as I backed away, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. But then, as if it were waiting for me, the figure twitched. My breath caught in my throat. I rushed to the door, desperate to escape the room, but then the phone buzzed in my pocket. Sophie's message flashed across the screen. "You shouldn't have come." I didn't even have time to react before the figure in the chair moved again, and then to my absolute horror, it spoke. "Don't leave me here. Don't leave me like them." I froze, my body frozen with fear. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It was Sophie's. I stumbled backward, tripping over the rug, my heart pounding in my ears. I rushed to the door, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I pulled it open. But as I glanced back toward the chair, the figure was no longer there. The room was empty. I couldn't breathe. My hands were trembling uncontrollably as I slammed the door shut behind me. The room had emptied, the figure in the chair disappearing into thin air, but the memory of the words, Sophie's voice, echoed in my mind. I stumbled down the hallway, desperate to get out, but the oppressive weight of the house seemed to grow heavier with each step. It felt as though the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating me, pushing me towards something I couldn't see yet. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, a chilling reminder of Sophie's cryptic message. "You shouldn't have come." I glanced down at the phone, the screen now displaying a new text. "I never wanted to be here. I never wanted you to find me." My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. I needed to understand what was happening. Why had Sophie sent me here? What was this place? What had she gotten herself tangled in? I hesitated for a moment, fighting the overwhelming urge to flee, but in the end, I couldn't turn back. I had come this far, and I had to know the truth. I retraced my steps, heading toward the stairs again, the dim light flickering from the hallway. Each creak of the floorboards beneath my feet made my skin crawl, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My breath caught in my throat as I approached the top of the stairs. At the end of the hall, the door to the left stood wide open, the room beyond it dark and inviting. There was something in that room. I didn't know what it was, but I felt drawn to it. The door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit room, its only illumination coming from a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were lined with old photographs, faded and yellowing with age. Each one was of Sophie, but none of them looked recent. They were old, taken years before I ever met her, and yet they were all displayed here, in this room. As I stepped inside, I felt the temperature drop, the chill from earlier settling in my bones. Something about this room was wrong. It wasn't just the photos, It was everything. The furniture was old and covered in dust, the air thick with mildew, but it wasn't the house that bothered me. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone. A noise from behind me made me freeze. It was a soft rustling, like footsteps on carpet. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned slowly, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing. The room was empty, save for the photographs. My phone buzzed again, another text from Sophie. "They're watching." I whipped around, my flashlight trembling in my hand, but there was no one there. I stared at the phone, feeling my hands shake as I typed back. "Who?" For a long moment, there was no response. The silence was deafening, and I felt like I was suffocating in it. Then the phone buzzed again. "The ones who took me." I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of her words settle on me like a suffocating blanket. Who had taken her? What had she gotten involved in? Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang, and I spun around, my heart racing. The room was suddenly much colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker, as if they were alive, crawling toward me. Then I heard it. A faint sound coming from somewhere deep within the house. A whispering. Low and muffled, like voices calling my name. I took a step toward the door, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps, but then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the room. A man. His features were obscured by the shadows, but I could make out his silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered. My pulse quickened and I stepped back, my foot hitting something on the floor, making a loud noise. The figure shifted and I froze, my heart racing. And then, to my absolute horror, the figure spoke. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice cold and unfeeling. I gasped, taking a step back. My legs felt weak, my body frozen with fear. The man didn't move toward me, but I could feel his presence closing in. I needed to get out. I needed to run. I turned and rushed for the door, but as I reached for the handle, I froze. The hallway outside was empty. I could hear footsteps, but they weren't coming from behind me. They were coming from ahead, coming closer. Suddenly the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped even further, as though a draft had swept through the house. But it wasn't just a draft. It was something else. Something worse. I looked over my shoulder at the figure in the corner, but it was gone. The room was empty again. I swung the door open and bolted into the hallway, but it felt like the walls were shifting, bending, warping around me. The house seemed to have taken on a life of its own, and I couldn't escape it. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then I heard Sophie's voice again, but this time it wasn't a message on my phone. It was a real voice echoing through the hallway. "Get out of here now!" I ran, my heart pounding in my ears, my feet pounding against the floor as I sprinted toward the front door. The whispers, the footsteps, all of it chased me, growing louder, more frantic. But the door wouldn't open. It was stuck, as if someone had locked it from the other side. Desperation hit me like a wave, and I yanked at the handle, pulling with all my strength. Finally, the door gave way, and I stumbled out into the night air, gasping for breath. I turned around, expecting to see the house looming behind me, but the fog had already rolled in, swallowing it whole. The house was gone, vanished, like it had never existed at all. In the distance, I heard Sophie's voice once more, soft, distant, and fading away. "Don't come back," and then silence.